V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai biyad Moshe. This is the Torah that Moses placed before the children of Israel, from the mouth of God to the hand of Moses. That's a song that we sing as we lift the Torah scroll at the end of our Torah service. And it finishes with this phrase, Al pi Adonai biyad Moshe, from the mouth of God through the hand of Moses. It's a rabbinic statement that concretizes the idea that God dictated everything in Torah word for word. This was the traditionally understood position of Judaism for a very long time. Al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe, from the mouth of God to the hand of Moses, or through the hand of Moses. But the rabbis themselves recognized that there was some problems with this. For example, Moses writes about his own death, if that's the case. Moses talks about where he is buried. And the rabbis ask, how is that possible? And they say that God divinely dictated to Moses everything, including his death, and Moses wrote it down with tears in his eyes. And those who believe that the entire Torah was divinely dictated word for word point to various sections where God instructs Moses to write down these words. Even write down this Torah. But that's taking a very literal understanding of Torah. Torah means teaching or instruction. And so it doesn't have to mean this entire Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. But it almost certainly means this teaching here that can be found within what we now call Torah. So therefore, the idea that God divinely dictated everything to Moses, even the rabbis had some questions and had to come up with some rather interesting ideas as to what it meant and how it might be possible that Moses wrote down everything in Torah. Rabbi Louis Jacobs, of blessed memory, in England, wrote a book which came from originally an Orthodox perspective, but said we need to be able to acknowledge that there are spelling mistakes in Torah, and that if we changed one letter in what's known as a hapax legomena, in a word that only exists here and nowhere else, Rabbi Louis Jacobs says if you look at this carefully and change, for example, one letter kaf to a letter nun, which are very similar looking, suddenly this word makes total sense in context. So Rabbi Louis Jacobs believed that it's possible to be an Orthodox Jew and to accept that when it was written down, mistakes came into Torah itself. That perspective was not held by the Bet Din and by certain authorities in the Orthodox community in England, and he was in fact kicked out of the Orthodox movement. And so it really became concretized, the idea that if you are an Orthodox Jew, then you believe that everything in Torah was divinely dictated, word for word. In Jewish philosophy and theology, though, there are widely differing opinions. Abraham Joshua Heschel, for example, writes that as a report about Revelation, the Bible itself is a midrash. That's a really important statement. As a report about Revelation, the Bible itself is a midrash. That is a commentary. It is not the truth. It's one way of expressing, of exploring something which is impossible to fully describe. Heschel is saying here that Torah is not divinely dictated word for word, but rather it is a perspective on Revelation. It is our first way of understanding what it was that God wanted from us, or, to put it another way, it was our first way of responding to the realization of a relationship between us and God. Franz Rosenzweig says that the content of Revelation is simply the fact of Revelation. The content of Revelation is simply the fact of Revelation. God's entering into a unique relationship with Israel. So according to Rosenzweig, the biblical passage immediately before the giving of the Ten Commandments in Exodus 19 and 20, God came down on Sinai, For Rosenzweig, that ends the revelation. That's all that was revealed, that God can come down, God can have a relationship with us. So he says that in Exodus chapter 20 verse 1, where it says God spoke, Rosenzweig says this is the beginning of interpretation. And then everything that follows is totally interpretive. Torah, Rosenzweig explains, is Israel's classic response to the revelatory encounter. That is a totally different and extremely refreshing perspective on revelation. Heschel and Rosenzweig holding similar but differing perspectives, that this isn't divinely dictated word for word, and we know this. We know this not just because of spelling mistakes, but because of historical mistakes in Torah. We know that it was written a certain period later. We can tell, for example, Abraham comes from Ur-Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldean Empire. We know that Ur wasn't in the Chaldean Empire when Abraham was around. It was only much later. So it shows us that Torah must have been written later than some people claim, because it would not have said Ur-Kasdim, it wouldn't have said Ur of the Chaldean Empire if it were written at the time when some people claim. So we know there are historical errors. We know that there are typographical mistakes. That doesn't mean that it's just some simply human text. What it means is that Torah is our first response to the recognition that we have a relationship with God. And it's not just a first response like a naive first draft, it's the classic response. It is the response that helped form our people together. The festival of Shavuot was originally a harvest festival, but as Jews became more urbanized and less connected to the harvest, the rabbis added an extra element to the festival of Shavuot, which was to celebrate the revelation at Sinai, which they said occurred on that night. And so the focus of the festival moved from the agricultural to the cerebral. Both were religious, but both in very different ways. One was religious in celebrating the harvest that God had given us. The other was religious in the sense of theology, in the sense of trying to work out our relationship with God. And there is a tradition of staying up very late, for some people even all night, in a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, in a study session. Traditionally, it's on the first night of Shavuot, which was last night. But we're having ours this evening. It's still Shavuot. We're having ours this evening. And so we encourage you to come and wrestle with revelation. I've shared just a little bit of discussion, a little bit of thought about what is revelation. Is revelation divinely dictated? Is the Bible a report about revelation? Is the Bible our response to revelation? We can only know that. We can only find our own answers by exploring that revelation closer. And so we encourage you to join us for a wonderful evening, this evening, of food and of study, of discussion that will go long into the night for those who are able to stay. We start with our meal, a potluck meal, and we encourage you, please bring food for yourself and to share. Sometimes they say enough food for 8 people. That will certainly keep us going long into the night. We're going to be studying about Musar, about Jewish virtue-based ethics. We're going to be looking at Judaism and mental health. We're going to be having our annual cheesecake competition. And we encourage you to bring a cheesecake for that, so that you might be the winner this year and get a certificate accordingly. We're going to be looking at multi-sensory revelation, how it felt to be at Sinai. And then, if it's not too late, we'll also look at mysticism, Jewish mysticism, and what separates Jewish mysticism from Santa Fe woo-woo. And we're going to be looking at Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, as our late night session. Revelation is communal, and it's also personal. According to Torah, God appeared at Sinai and all Israel heard. But when it came to each mitzvah, there is a midrash that says an angel would come to each person in the community and tell them the mitzvah and kiss them on the lips, which is that intimate individual connection to revelation. We hope that you'll be able to join us this evening for that communal experience and for something very special and individual as well. I wish you Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.